We sailed our 37-foot monohull around the world, but now we have a new challenge. To sail this catamaran across 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean.
Although we've been here before, it turns out joining another boat can make the same ocean an entirely different experience.
With high highs.
Yeah, you're free! Yes! Result, guys.
And low lows, as we battle multiple breakages.
So it turns out it's worse than we thought, but it looks like we don't have an autopilot now.
In this series, we share the realities of life on board a catamaran, sailing across the vast open ocean, out of sight of land for weeks.
We do have, in case we need assistance, we do have an air horn at the helm. So if there's something that really needs to be done and you can't leave the helm, you can fire that off, and the other three who are on board will jump up, quite alarmed, I guess, and give some assistance. Right, it's the chain that snapped.
The chain?
The chain has snapped. The chain has snapped. It's in I just looked where the autopilot is. Yeah. So just had a look down below where the steering wheel attaches the autopilot and the steering cable, and the chain that attaches the cable to the steering wheel has snapped, and you can see where a couple of links on the chain have actually snapped. So that's quite a lot of force. Okay, that's the problem. That is the steering chain, and that has snapped. Actually, that's snapped in a couple of places. So that's why we no longer have steering. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, we're in waves, the rudders are being bashed back from side to side. I don't know how we're going to connect this back together. This is going to be quite tricky to get to the point where we can steer. We do have an emergency tiller, but to use that you have to sit outside on the step at the back of the boat, and that is not going to work in this sea state. And we've got more than 24 hours to go. Well, yeah, just at normal speeds we have over 24 hours to go. We've got about 150 miles to go to the Caribbean. So last time when we were about this far out, we snapped the boom in half. This is a much bigger problem. I don't know what's happened there, but there's no connector for the cable. So this is the steering cable that the chain attaches to, then the chain goes over a cog on the wheel, so that the wheel then connects to the rudders, and the actual chain has snapped. That's crazy. But it must have been on its way for a while, because it's broken multiple links. And then the connector has fallen off the end. The connector probably only fell off the end when it lost all tension and fell off, but it's broken multiple links on that chain.
Yeah, it's unusual. It's a good design that you break more than one link. It means they're all under the same amount of tension. That's the theory there.
So I'm just taking the link piece that links the cable onto this broken bit of chain off, so that we can then cut the broken bits off, and then put a piece of dyneema in between and lash it up to get the final distance to the Caribbean. Okay, so that's broken bit off. We can now cut the sharp piece off, and then the plan is to use some dyneema to lash this bit to the bit that isn't broken, to basically replace the broken links, because this bit doesn't actually go over the cogs around the wheel, this is still off the end. So it's lucky that it's not the bit that's gone over the cogs that break. But what I guess I should go and do now is inspect the rest of the chain, which I've taken off and Ron's got upstairs on the saloon table where it's easy to work on, and check for any cracks or any wear or any rust on the rest of the chain, or any weak points that might break on the last leg in. Right, I'm going to take that upstairs where it's easier to deal with. The other end of this, the link piece fell out and we're missing the clip, so somehow the clip's come off, but that could have gone anywhere. It could be down in the build.
Luckily that happened just before dawn, so the sun is actually now starting to come up and it's light enough to see, which is going to hopefully make life a bit easier. But we've unfortunately got no way of holding the boat downwind or down the waves, and so we're now broadside onto them, which is going to put quite a bit of strain on the rudders. So yeah, the sooner we can get this fixed, the better.
Can you imagine what this motion would be like on a monohull though? We'd be rolling all over the shop.
Yeah, if this had happened on a monohull, then it would be pretty much impossible to do the work that Ron and Matt are currently trying to do to the chain to get it fixed, just because the motion would be so violent broadside onto the waves like this.
Okay, so Ron's cut off the broken bits of chain, which are now here, and now we're trying to work out, so this is now slightly short, so we're going to add in some Dyneema. This is the thinnest Dyneema we got on the boat, which should be strong enough, but we're going to add that in to make the cable, to attach the chain back to the cable at the right length, so we know how much we've taken out. And what we're trying to do at the moment is work out how we attach this onto the chain, and we don't want it to be a rough attachment, so thinking to add a shackle onto the end of the chain so it's got a smooth surface for the Dyneema to attach to, because we don't want any chafe points on this. So we've got all the shackles out, we're trying to find one that fits. They don't quite fit, we're going to have to slightly open one out to make it work. But we're getting somewhere. Just been inspecting the rest of the chain, and unfortunately there are 3 links with major cracks all the way through, but they're in the middle, so it's not that we can just chop the end off. So we need to stop the rudders wanging around in the waves and just get back moving again. We're just going to have to hope that these don't break when we put this back together. But we should stress here, if somebody says you've been overstressing this and that's why it's broken, we've been sailing, because we're hand steering, we've been sailing all the way across this ocean with just the Genoa, or when it's gone very light, the spinnaker. We've been sailing along 4 or 5 or 6 knots. We've been sailing so underpowered that this is definitely not because we've pushed the boat too hard. I think this must have been on its way for years, and it's just, it is more stressful bringing the boat out into the ocean. There are bigger waves, there are much bigger forces on everything, and it's just chosen this time to go. But it's not because of the way we've been sailing the boat. The more common thing to go wrong that is documented for these boats is for the steering cable to break. So Ron actually has a length of Dyneema that's long enough to replace the steering cable specifically as a spare part. But I mean, look at the size of this chain. You just I would not think until now that this chain would break, and now whenever I look on a boat that's got a steering chain, I'm going to look very carefully at all the links and see if there's any cracks. But I wouldn't expect something this beefy to break. It just shows the forces that are on the rudders from the waves in the ocean. We've opened out these shackles so they fit over the ends of the cables. We've now done them up nice and tightly with pliers, and we've now got a smooth surface that we can lash the Dyneema onto on each end to reattach it to the chain. The next challenge is to try and get the chain back on over the cog, which is up through the roof here. I guess we lash the wheel, then that won't be moving, and then we've got to connect it all up. But of course the boat's moving around in the ocean, the rudders are flicking back and forth on that, so I think we've got to try and hold them steady-ish whilst Ron does this, which means we either need to lash the rudder arms which are in the engine bays or put the emergency tiller on and try and hold it with that. I think we probably have more luck lashing them central in the engine bays where we can actually go straight onto the tiller arm. So I think that is probably the next priority to go and do, because we can hear the rudders banging back and forth. They have got a dyneema stop, so they're not going against a hard end stop, but it doesn't sound good. And if we break something there, we're in real trouble.
Okay.
So this is the arm that links the two rudders between the two hulls, and this is the tiller arm, so that's the rudder shaft right there. So we're going to lash this now so that it can't go back and forth. Oh, that'll work. You do that and that's same the other side, yeah? Okay, so it's lashed half on this side, and we'll lash the other half on the other side. Okay, not one of those waves coming in here. Okay, so I'm lashing it on this side. I need to adjust the lashing slightly. And Ron's in the other engine bay in between us. We're going to lash this. Just undoing it, Ron. Okay. Got the rudders lashed central-ish, so they're not whacking back and forth. To be honest, if we thought about it, that is the first thing we should have done. But at least it's done now. And I'm really glad there aren't any big waves, because those waves could really easily come in here. Luckily the engine bay on these boats is sealed, it's got a bulkhead, so even if this did fill up with water, it would be bad for the engine, but it wouldn't be bad for, we wouldn't sink. So to access the steering, we've got to take the roof panel out in the cabin. Looking up through the roof, you can see that's the chain. The chain you can see there is from the autopilot, but the steering chain needs to follow up through that fiberglass sheath, and then at the top you can just see a cog sticking out. So we need to feed it up and over that, and then lash it back down the bottom to the steering cable. This would have been virtually impossible if the rudders had been wanging back and forth. Now we've fixed the rudders, it makes this much more possible. You can actually climb up in here because the shelves act as a kind of ladder. So it's going to be tricky, but possible. The only trouble is at the moment we're broadside onto the waves, so the boat is really getting thrown around. Things are getting thrown off of shelves and places, which doesn't normally happen on this boat. But yeah, I think we've got a plan. I think we'll be back in action soon. Just tightening the bolts on the ends so they definitely won't come off. They've got nylon nuts on the end so they can't come undone. And then we're just getting everything else we need. Dyneema, scissors, head torch to go up and put this all together. Are good? Cool. We decided the Dyneema we had was too fat, but Ron pointed out he had some thinner stuff that's tying the dinghy, stopping the dinghy going, sliding across the back of the boat. So much thinner. So we just hung off the back of the boat, grabbed onto the dinghy and replaced this with an older bit of rope, so we've got the right stuff to attach the steering with. So Ron's feeding the chain over the cog, which is attached to the steering wheel, and then that's going to drop down, and then we need to attach the chain to the cables onto those shackles that we put on. That was a big wave. So Ron's lashing the chain in place, but to do it, to make it easy, Amy's actually up on the helm and we're just calling through to her, like quarter turn to starboard, half turn to port, so that we can line up and get access to where we need to lash it, or where Ron needs to lash it. Making sure that the cables are still on the pulleys at the bottom, so it should all run once it's lashed up tight. And then once this is lashed up, we'll cut the ends of the Dyneema off so that we haven't got anything to get snagged, and then we'll go and undo the lashings on the rudder arms in the engine bays, and we're going to have to time that, because there's been some really big waves which have actually been washing over those hatches on the engine bays whilst we've been doing this, so we have to time that so we don't fill an engine bay with water. But then we should have steering again. about 2 hours after it broke. We shall see.
Okay, scissors again.
Scissors.
Scalpel.
Scalpel. Surgery. Boat surgery. Okay.
Okay.
I got scissors. We're good.
Be holding the wheel as steady as possible and then turning it in whichever direction they shout. But yeah, hopefully, I think I just heard that it's all connected and sorted, hopefully, or at least a test.
Some big waves, we just broadside onto them. So now we need to open the engine bays, tighten up. There's an adjustment on the cable, so we probably haven't got it quite tight enough with the dyneema lashing. We need to tighten up the adjustment on the cable, then we'll untie or cut the lashings that we've put on to hold the rudder central. Fingers crossed, we'll have steering again. Is that just a bottle screw on that?
Yeah.
That is the lashing coming off the rudder. So we just realised there's another couple of pulleys at the back here Ron remembered about. It's a good job he knows his boat. And we were wondering why the cable was so slack. Where we've been adjusting it. And it looks like it's fallen off these pulleys as well. So we've got to kind of crawl in the back here and put the cable back onto those pulleys, so that it routes neatly and so it will run smoothly, and then tighten up the cables again, and then we'll go back and double check that it hasn't fallen off the pulleys in the cabin. So here we've got the two pulleys that the cable goes on, and when we're putting it back together there was a bit too much slack in the cable and it fell off, so we're just double checking those are now connected properly. And the other problem we had was this fiberglass casing that the chain is going up through. Our shackle pin, where we'd attached it, the shackle pin was catching on the bottom edge of that. So we've just undone the screws and moved that across so the shackle pin can't catch on that now. So I think now we're ready to try sailing.
Got no flow over the rudder yet.
A bit more, do you know? It's working! I've just been able to turn us downwind. We've got the smallest scrap of Genoa out, but we are sailing again. Well done, Ron.
Well done, team. So that was 2.5 hours after it broke. It's now 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
It's pretty good going.
Time for breakfast.
Time for breakfast and a cup of tea.
Okay.
So that is brilliant that we've got that fixed, but we shouldn't be under any illusions, because when I checked the chain that we've now put back, there were 3 large cracks all the way through a couple of the links. So there's no guarantee it's going to last all the way to St. Lucia. So we're just sailing under even more reduced sail. We're doing, keep it down to about 5 knots, try and really look after the steering, and hopefully it will get us there.
Yeah, the trouble is that we're all also really tired. I'd literally come off watch maybe 20 minutes prior to it happening, and Ron hasn't got much sleep last night either. So yeah, I think the priority, certainly if you slept at all, but I think the priority today is that we all try and get some rest and obviously prep for if it happens again.
Well, the other priority is I think a bacon sandwich and a cup of tea.
Oh.
Which Jane is in the process of making us. Superstar
amazing,
Jane, that's
poor
exactly
Jane.
what you want after 2.5 hours starting at 6:30 in the morning. Yeah, I mean, not something that we'd have thought to check on a boat. Certainly will do now, forever in the future. But yeah, you learn every time. Hopefully we'll get there. 150 miles to go. And that beeping is the, we've turned the instruments on to try and see how fast we're going and stuff, and they keep dropping out and complaining, so that's another thing we need to fix when we get there. Jane, you're an absolute star. Thank you very much for the bacon sandwich.
The catering department hasn't let us down, it's just everything else.
We still don't have a working autopilot, but at least now we can actually steer, by hand or foot, towards the Caribbean. And that is something to smile about.
So whilst we were fixing the steering, I'm sure a lot of you were saying, why don't you just use the emergency tiller? And I'm going to explain why. So this is the emergency tiller on this boat. It's a solid bar of steel with a notch cut in the end that fits onto the top of the rudder shaft, and you can use it on either the port or the starboard side. But that's how big it is. And because it goes directly onto the top of the rudder shaft on the Catamaran is right at the back, on the back corner. Obviously on a monohull on Florence, the rudder shaft's in the middle, so our emergency tiller, similar size, slots on in the cockpit where you would be steering anyway. But for this one, we have to go right out onto the back step of the boat. And when I was getting some ropes out of the dinghy to use to repair the steering system, I was stood on the back step of the boat, and the water, when a wave came over, came up above my knees. So it's not a safe place to be. It's quite a lot calmer now. We're not getting as many waves over the back deck, and certainly none coming up into the aft saloon area here. So I'm going to try and use this and show you what it's like to use this emergency tiller on the Catamaran. We learn something new every day. I'm trying to put it onto this one, and the head of the rudder shaft is damaged, and I can't actually get the emergency tiller onto it. But because it's a Catamaran, we've got two chances. We can try the other side. Okay, that's in. So this is the steering position. I can just about see down the side of the boat. I can't see the compass. I can't see any of the nav stuff. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Ron to let go of the helm and see if I can actually steer with this, even in these small, mild waves. All right, Ron? Okay. That is taking a lot of force. That is taking a lot of force. Oh, that is really hard. I think you could use this in a flat calm when there's no wind, but I'm really having to put a lot of force into steering that. That is not something you could use for any length of time. And the waves have died down now from what they were earlier. Earlier we had waves coming up across here, so you'd be soaked. Can't really see where you're going. And oh, that is a lot of force to try and steer the boat, even in these mild, easy conditions. So that is why putting the emergency tiller on didn't even cross our minds when we had to fix the steering. It would have been one person down here fighting it, and it was dark, so you couldn't see where you're going, no compass, no reference. Yeah, just, to be honest, I'm not sure really what the point of this is. I think you'd need to have, if this was my boat, I would now be getting a long tube to sit on there, so you've got a lot more leverage to use with this. Yeah, and then at least you could have a handheld GPS in front of you or something and you stand a chance. But as it is, you'd be absolutely knackered within 20 minutes of doing this.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I've just finished what is hopefully my final night watch of the passage, and so far the steering has been holding up, so Fingers crossed it'll stay for the rest of the trip. We've got about 50 miles left to go, but by the time dawn is here, we're going to be approaching a really critical point where we come between two islands. So yeah, we've got a plan for what we'll do should the steering fail in that time, but in the meantime, yeah, I've just got to try and get some sleep. I'm on watch again at 7. The sun is coming up behind me, and in front of me I can see the island of St. Lucia and the peaks of the Pitons, and then also on the starboard side I can see Martinique. So we're just approaching the gap between the two islands. So far the steering has been working fine, so fingers crossed it stays that way. Hardly seen any birds for the entire trip, just really a handful, and mostly really small ones. But as we're approaching land, this morning we've just been surrounded by boobies, so there's more and more of them the closer that we get, and they're just diving, and I think they're catching maybe the flying fish that we're scaring as we're going in. But yeah, really nice to kind of see some life. It's been a while. Such a lovely day today as well. Sun shining, and we've got gentle trade winds and hopefully a smooth entrance into the bay, Rodney Bay in St. Lucia. But yeah, this is a very different arrival to the last time we came into St. Lucia, which was I think either 8 years ago. Yeah, but then we had absolute torrential rain and a 50-knot squall a few days out. So yeah, it's been pretty squally again as we've approached. I think that's quite normal, but the most we've seen on this trip was 45 knots, and we were much more prepared for it. So we're in the gap between Martinique and St. Lucia, and I just can't get over how many other boats there are. We've seen a handful of boats over the last 3 weeks, and that's both ships and sailing boats. And I often feel like when we're on passage, life and the whole world goes on pause. So it's a weird feeling kind of coming back to all of this life that's been happening whilst we've been at sea.
It feels fantastic to see land. I mean, it's been, 3 weeks? And yeah, I feel totally elated, relieved, and also a bit sad, because actually I've totally loved it. 99% of this trip has just been absolutely fantastic, and I've seen stuff that I will never see again. Just amazing. The Atlantic isn't as scary as I imagined. I thought it'd be some really horrible, ferocious ocean, which I'm sure some people's experience might be that, but actually it's been pretty kind to us on the whole, and so for that I'm very grateful. And just all the wonderful sea life you see along route is just lifts your spirits, and you just feel very much more in tune with the world, really, and just the simplicity of how beautiful everything just is, and not all the problems that are around the world. You're just, this is how it should be, you know. Everyone should experience it if they can, because It's a good leveller of actually this is how life should be.
This is very different to when we last came into Rodney Bay. Last time it was absolutely hammering down with rain. I had my Fowley jacket on, kind of peering out from under the bimini on Florence and couldn't believe that this was the Caribbean.
Welcome to the Caribbean, Matt.
Yeah. This is fresh water. And this is exactly the same point as that shot was taken, just as we're coming around the end of Pigeon Island. And once you come around here, we just come into flat water. After all the ocean waves we've had for the last 3 weeks, the boat bouncing around, suddenly you come around this point, the water is just flat. Oh, still pretty breezy trade winds. Need the strap on, the chin strap on the hat. Yeah, it's beautiful here. It feels great to just stop after 3 weeks. It's been a really tough passage this time. Not having the autopilot had completely changed how the passage was, I think. Our first passage across here on Florence was really tough because it was our first ocean passage. After that first one, we learned a lot, and all the passages after that, all the oceans after that, we were a lot more rested because of the way we changed our watch pattern. But not having the autopilot, I felt almost as tired on this one as we did on our first ever ocean passage across here. So it's been tough, but it's great to actually finally be here. So we reverse down on that. We're not moving on the GPS, we're not moving relative to the boats around us. So we're anchored, that's it. We made it. All the way across the Atlantic.
Woo! Made me jump. Cheers. Cheers. We've earned it.
That certainly was an eventful ocean passage. We learnt a lot about sailing on catamarans, sailing as part of a crew, and also about ourselves. And we've had a lot of questions about the trip. So next time we are going to answer those questions, including what we think about sailing across an ocean on a monohull versus a catamaran, and of course the big question, are we now going to go and buy a catamaran?
Continuing our voyage would not be possible without the support of our patrons. Thank you to all of you, and especially to our star patrons.
For extra updates in between these bi-weekly videos, and to find out what we're up to in real time, head over to Patreon and join the crew. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you don't miss the next episode here on YouTube.